Sure. So my name is Julia Pierce. I am from Utah, that is in the western part of the United States. So my story is actually equal to starting with where my son's story begins when he was 2 years old. So that is where my story begins. And that is actually in my second act, which is an interesting place for me. So that is where I love to start with my story, is not in the first act of my life, but in the second act when our son was just before his second birthday. And he suddenly started with an unknown, what the doctors called a catastrophic illness. And he began on a really normal day. He was home with his dad with just being a 2-year-old. He was getting some new teeth, and so they decided to hang out for the day, and then suddenly, he started having seizures. And seizures, for people who haven't seen them, are very scary, and it was that for my husband and our son. So my husband called the paramedics, they called emergency, and they came, couldn't find anything going on with our son. I was actually starting a new job that day, so wasn't home with them at the time. And the paramedics said to call the pediatrician, the children's doctor, and go ahead and take him in to see the doctor to see if there was anything that could be found. The doctor couldn't find anything that was going on. They went home. I came home from work and said, "What happened to you two today?" And my husband said, "You'll never believe what happened," and proceeded to tell me that our son had started with seizures and the rest of the story, and we couldn't believe it. He had a normal night that night, as 2-year-olds were in their life at that time, just having regular dinner, had bath time, we played, read books, got ready for bed, and then the next day everything changed again. So that's the beginning of my story, because what happened after that was he woke up the next day, couldn't walk, had a hard time feeding himself, which he had been doing for many months. And we called the doctor again. They said, "Get him up to the children's hospital right away." Then many more seizures happened, and we spent the next 9 days up in the children's hospital as this illness that had happened so suddenly took all of our son's abilities, including walking and talking, sitting up, feeding himself, swallowing, and doing any of those things he had learned in the first 2 years. So, what had started out as a typical thing then changed our lives.
Yeah. Julia, how did you cope during that time? Because that sounds terrifying.
It happened so quickly that we took one moment at a time. In fact, it was such a mystery that our son was baffled. When he came to the hospital with us, he thought it was ridiculous. He was laughing. He couldn't figure out why he couldn't walk anymore. So he was bumping down the hallway, running into walls, and then he would look at us and say, with his eyes, because he couldn't speak anymore, he was saying, "Well, what is happening here?" And he would look at us and then kind of grin, like, "This is a joke. You got to get me out of here." And then it got much more serious. So things happened so quickly. We were in the emergency mode of trying to take things. And it was also very scary because this young boy, not quite 2 years old, was having this major medical happening. And we had no idea what to do except for to stay in this moment. The seizures were happening so quickly. We would time a seizure, take a breath, time a seizure, take a breath. That's what happened for days and days and days at a time. So we barely had time to think about it in those beginning days.
And then where did things progress from there?
So after being in the hospital for 9 days, The doctors didn't know if our son was going to survive this major illness. Again, they called it a catastrophic illness because it took all of his skills, took all of his abilities. They didn't know if he was going to be able to sit up again or walk again. And they said that one day, and then he watched them. He was a very observant young child, a young baby. And the next day, he pulled himself up out of the crib and started to walk. The nurses got an IV pole and helped him so that he could do whatever it was he was going to learn. The doctors had no idea he was going to be able to do this ever, and then this quickly. They quickly learned that we're just going to let him go, which is what we did. So he learned how to walk and then run. They put a helmet on him because he was still having seizures and bumping into a lot of things going down that hallway. And we just grinned because he was going again. So after that, they discharged us from the hospital, said, we have no idea what happened. We never found a reason for any of the illnesses or things that were happening to him. But they said, we're going to have you go home now, get a helmet, and things should be okay in 6 months. Doctors are really great most of the time, but they don't often know what is happening. So we went home, got a helmet so that he would be safer when he was learning to walk again. And then we began having therapies. And when I say we, it was Dallin, that's our son's name. He was learning to walk, he was learning to feed himself again, he was learning to communicate. He never got his spoken language back, but he was learning how to use sign language. Years later, probably 2.5 years later, he did learn how to communicate using assistive technology, which sometimes is using a device. Sometimes he used pictures. It was an assortment of things. And then he also kept doing those things for many years. So that's what we did for quite a few years. He started going to school. The teachers were fantastic. They taught him how to be around other children, and he needed help opening milk and picking up crayons and sitting next to other people because he was learning how to do all of that again. So that's where we began all over again with him.
Can I ask as well, how did you feel about going home from the hospital and not having an explanation behind why all these things were happening?
In the beginning of that part of it, we were so happy that he had survived the illness that it wasn't something we spent a lot of time with. After, I would say, a year or so, I did get curious about it and wondered if there was more. Was there more than a random illness? Was there more to it? But when we first got home, we were so happy and relieved and joyful that he had survived because, again, this was a massive illness. So we went from being relieved and happy to have Dallin with us, that the overwhelm of, okay, let's teach how to do these beginning walking, using our hands again, all of those things, that was the immediate focus. It was later when we started to wonder about, I wonder if there was more to this unknown illness. It was later. Yeah.
So with Dallin, what was life like for Dallin?
For him, he took everything mostly in stride. He had lost so many skills, including, we believe, his nerve endings, so he couldn't feel things very well. And he was curious about life around him again. So he did have a hard time with communication because he couldn't speak again, so we were teaching him how to get the things he wanted in life. So as a 2-year-old, he also wanted crackers, and he also wanted that book on the top shelf, and he also wanted to go and see grandma and grandpa. So we were teaching communication, and 2 and 3 and 5-year-olds do get frustrated about a lot of things, right? Because kids are curious and they also want things really quickly. So, not being able to communicate fast enough was frustrating at times for him, but he was also really happy most of the time to see extended family members and to play with dad and to read those books when he got them and when he figured out how to ask for the crackers that were behind that pantry door, then life was wonderful. And he did love going to the park and the zoo and go on the school bus. So it was a mixture of how do we help him tell us what he's thinking about and also find the joy and play so much because kids learn a lot through play. So that was being a kid and finding so much joy. That was the balance in all of those beginning early years. That was the joy and the fun and the trick.
Sounds so lovely.
He was those fun years. Yes, for sure.
I'm curious as well where things progress from here.
So he had really great years learning, going to those therapies, and he loved to learn through life. So going down the slides and swinging on swings. We also found horseback riding was wonderful for getting him strong. So we spent most Fridays playing really big. So we would do life and going to the store to find the wonderful favorite new toys. And it didn't have to be a big toy, it was something small. And seeing aunts and uncles. Those were the great years of learning to become who he was. That was the fun part of it. It was a little bit later, maybe early teens, when he's becoming this independent teenager, because teenagers think they know everything. And so did he. He then developed a secondary illness that created some more weakness in parts of his body. So he started to need help walking and to play differently. But that means that we did things differently. It didn't stop him. It meant that we gave him more ways to communicate. So he used his sign language. He also had a great eye roll. So teenagers are ridiculous with their eye roll, and he could slam a door with the best of every teenager. And that was lovely. He also needed at that point how to say, I think I need to go see the doctor, which may have been unusual for some teenagers, but he did have some things happening, still having seizures. So we paid attention to helping him learn how to do those things more. It was about then that he needed to learn how to, so he also loved to downhill ski. We live around mountains in this part of the country, and he was a skier. He took to it naturally, and then he needed to change how he did his skiing and his mountain climbing and the fun things that he did. So we were paying attention to that and noticed that as he was getting a little weaker with those big activities, that he was having some changes in those muscles. So we noticed that as he was getting weaker, he was also having some few other changes with his medical world. And then we noticed that he was having some anxieties come up. And it could be that when his medical world was changing, it was making him a little nervous about doing some of those activities. So that started to come when he was an early teenager, probably around 14 or 15. And that's what began to come next for him.
And in terms of supporting with his anxiety, was that difficult to do?
It was intriguing for us because, again, he couldn't tell us everything that was going on with the supports we were putting in place with his communication. The communication systems we had, we were teaching him communication, and then he was using what was called an augmentative and alternative communication system, or AAC, to let us know what it was he was needing or thinking or wanting to tell us about. And as anxieties were increasing, he didn't always have the thought process in place to say, "This is confusing," or "I need to go sit over here," or "Let me have a break," all at the same time as trying to process and think about formulating communication. So that was maybe one of the trickier parts with supporting some mental health with him and his communication, 'cause it's tricky if I ever start to get a little anxious. I'm not always thinking about the words that I'm able to use either. So when you have to use another system, it does become a little more intense sometimes. So we were watching for his body cues. We were watching for one time he stopped in a doorway and held onto the door with really tight hands, and he had white knuckles. And that was one of his signals to us that he needed to not go into that space for a little while. And we did let that become one of his communications about, "I'm feeling a little unsure. Can somebody help me?" And that was okay as well. I have body language that I use when I'm not feeling okay, and so do many of us. So that was one of the things that we allowed other people to know about. Dallin got to use all of his ways of communication, and then we let other people know, when this happens, this is what it means, and here's how you can support him. And it did turn out most of the time that we would catch up to him eventually, but it was tricky. Anxieties are really powerful and can feel big for a lot of us, and they felt big for Dallin. They did.
Yeah. I love as well that, because I think a lot of people think when someone's non-speaking that they don't communicate, but
Mhm.
it's so true, through, like, AAC devices or, people find their own ways to communicate, like what you were saying, holding on to doors, and I think it's really wonderful that not only did he have access to different ways to communicate, but then you're also teaching other people the ways he communicates as well because yeah, so many people just kind of brush off non-speaking people and or leave them out of the conversation or don't try and understand. So I'm so glad that you brought that up.
And with him, he knew how to communicate with different people. He actually had 7 devices and many other ways to communicate. So he would adjust his style of communication for different people. And it was fascinating for me to sit back and say, "Oh, with that person, he's going to use sign language. And with that person, he'll use his communication device. And with you, he's just going to roll his eyes and go into hilarity." So he was actually a very powerful communicator. So I love that you know about communication. He was joyful to watch and to communicate with, and be alongside of him. Most of the time, he would be like, "Mom, you got to go away for a minute. Just let me do my gig here." So that was also very fun for me. to take a breath and say, "Yes, yes, I know you have this. Please, please do your thing." That's wonderful. Yeah.
Can I ask as well, with his second illness that he ended up having, what was that one?
So again, it was another unknown. They determined that it was an unknown muscle wasting. So it came into all of his muscles. He did get weaker. He did not like using a wheelchair, but he would use a chair as like a walker as he helped his friends go from space to space. He was powerfully motivated by helping other folks, and they were his friends and they were his people that he had known for many years. So he loved to do that naturally. And so it was ingenious that he would help somebody else go from space to space. And by doing so, that would help him find a little balance. And I spoke with somebody who was a wheelchair user, and they said, don't make him get in a wheelchair. Because I was saying, when do we help him learn this? And they said, oh my goodness, he will know when it was time. So it was another unknown that came to him, and it changed how he did things, but it didn't ever really stop him. He moved differently. He would hold on to somebody's arm. They were there to support him as he chose it. We looked for possible muscular dystrophies. We looked for possible answers to what could be happening in a way to support him. And as a result, found that he could determine how to use his energy and when to have somebody help him on his terms, which is a really powerful reminder for people to say, I'll be here. You tell me when. And it was another moment for him to be saying, I'll let you know. I'll let you know. But it was unknown again. He was what people called an enigma, which if they didn't adore him so much, he would have left quickly. But his medical team was extraordinarily kind and open to what was happening in his world. So he was the unknown throughout his life.
Dallin sounds like just the resilience is amazing and the strength and maintaining that independence at such a difficult time with all these hurdles being thrown at him.
I think that's one of the things I learned so well from Dallin is that he could be sick for months, and he sometimes got pneumonia. When he was losing the swallow and his ability to eat some foods, he still ate them. He loved foods that were not that good for him to eat, but he loved them, and so he ate them still. But when he got sick for months at a time, he still wanted to find joy. He still watched those movies that cracked him up, even when he was very weak. And then he would get back up again. And I would watch him thinking, how does he do this? And I came to realize bit by bit that it was part of who he was. It was part of almost his essence as a human on the planet, that he got up and again and would look at you and say, so are you coming? Are you ready? Because let's go do some things now. And it really was a powerful way to look at the world. And can I do that now? Can we do this together? Yeah.
And I'm curious, how his life progressed, how things, went, after having that second illness, after, going through that, the resilience, where does life go from there?
So things did progress medically. It was a degenerative muscle wasting disorder, and it did go internal muscles as well. And so the muscles we have are everywhere. And it was a really powerful reminder for myself and my husband and all of, again, our son's medical team to see how many muscles that the muscle wasting affected. So it went internal, it went into his, swallow, and it went into his GI system, and it continued into his legs and his arms, and, eventually, the neurology team did an MRI, and they found it in his brain. So the disease did end up going multi-system wide. And as it progressed, he became the one that slowed the pace and let us know, "Here's what I'll be doing." He ended up receiving school services at home, and we followed his lead. He had many school members who provided I'm gonna say creative ways for him to learn, and they tried many things, and he would agree to some, and then he would grin at them and say, "That's not what I'm gonna do anymore," to other ideas. It did eventually become to the point where we were then receiving end of life care for him. And as a family, those were big decisions, and we came to follow Dallin's lead always. For somebody who was non-speaking, as you said, we don't always know how to follow somebody, but Dallin led with such power and eloquence and just, "Are you sticking with me? Can you do this still?" And if people couldn't, then he would leave. He couldn't be in a space with people who didn't follow him. And so that's what eventually did happen is we had the time, and not every family does, but we did have the time for end of life planning, and that still makes me tremble a little bit because we don't always have those options as families, and Dallin led that. So it eventually did. All of these illnesses, his disabilities, did eventually end his life, but he was in charge at every step. And people still wonder, how do you do that with somebody who is not always seen, like you said, as somebody who can tell us? And yet he did. So that's the next powerful step for our son is he did stay always as the one who let people know, "You can be here, and I'm gonna say goodbye to you now," until the end of his life. And what a powerful example for us still is that he was incredibly always the one who led with such power and kindness and hilarity and a roll of the eyes and a slip of the dagger across the room. If you thought you could get away with something, he'd be like, "Oh, darling, I don't think so." So that was the next part for him.
He sounds absolutely inspiring hearing his story.
He
And I
Ye
wonder, oh, sorry. You
No, go
you go
right ahead.
ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, Oh, I'm sorry. I was just gonna expand on just yeah, just how inspiring listening to that. I think there's so many things to take away and so many things to live by as well.
I think the side that goes with that, right in parallel path, is that it was a gnarly experience. Things were intense. He did go full force with many, many things, and it wasn't rainbows and puppy dogs. It was months of illnesses. It was really tight decisions. And every person that stayed in his spaces, in his realm, knew that it was for him. And we didn't always agree with what he was telling us to do next. And we're the ones who had to rampage up and down the hallways and go, "You gotta be kidding me. This is not what any of us like." And he was also the one living in bits of, "Okay, so I'm the one who needs help walking 20 feet. Do you see me? Are you here? Can we do this together?" So it wasn't always joy and laughter, but we found that joy because of the moments that were present and the people that stayed as he agreed. He didn't tolerate people who had the energy that was intense. He had enough intensity. Don't bring any extra intensity. And that included us, my husband and myself. We had to check ourselves as we came into the home. If we had been gone to work or the grocery or wherever, bring only the best stuff into his realm because there was enough of the other things.
Can I ask as well, what your advice for other people would be? Could be any bit of advice that you like.
Wow, that's a wonderful
Such a big
thought.
question.
It is, and it's also wonderful because I think as I've sat with this, so Dallin passed away 11 years ago. And as I've sat with what he brought to us and what he became and who he became, I think what I would say is being present, because if I'm not present, then I'm going to miss that deep look that he would have given me. And if I was worried about what did eventually come, which was him passing away, then I was missing the here and now. So I would say to be present, as difficult as that feels sometimes. Whatever's coming is coming. Whatever might be, might. So that's what I think. And it's really difficult to attain. And yet we can. We did find that ability, my husband and I. And um, it was powerful. It was powerful to be in the minutes with our son while he gave us all of his gnarly, powerfully wonderful, "Oh my gosh, can we get through this? Yeah, we can" moments.
And Julia, can I ask as well, is there any part of your story or Dallin's story that you wanted to share before I turn the recording off? Anything that you might have missed?
So I think one of my last things to share is that when I was writing the book about our son, that music is what pulsed through our lives as well. In the book that I wrote, the chapter headings are all titles of songs because he pulsed and just jammed with life. And so with that, he gave us such memories of music. And even though I couldn't listen to music for a period of time after he died, I just have so many joyful things with it again now. And that's what I would love for people to remember is even when things are hard, it will come back at some point, perhaps, and to hold that as a hope. And that's the part that I wanted to share with folks about our son as well, is he did become something even when doctors didn't know how to do that. With him, he showed them and he showed us how to do that. It was a wonderful thing to be able to share. Thank you for that.
Julia, can I also ask, what's your book called and where can people find it?
So, thank you. The book is called The Boy Who Became More Than We Could Imagine, and it's available on Amazon or on my website, which is juliapierce.net.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure being here. I love talking about our son. He was incredible.